He arrived at the farm wearing old clothes and using a name that was not his. But when the man who knew his secret finally appeared, everything he had built with those people was suddenly at risk. The night Orson Vale arrived at the small farm outside Bellwether County, he had only one goal: to find out if the woman everyone praised would still respect a man who had nothing. Rain had damaged the dirt roads for 3 days. The old wooden fences around the farm were broken in several places, and the fields needed more workers than the family could afford to hire. Nobody expected a stranger with worn clothes and an empty pocket to be useful. That was exactly what Orson wanted. He left his expensive watch hidden inside a small box at a nearby inn. He removed his fine coat, changed into simple clothes, and introduced himself as Owen Reed, a farmhand looking for work. Only a few people in the city knew his real identity. Orson Vale was the youngest member of a powerful family that controlled shipping routes, gambling houses, and several businesses across the eastern coast. His family name opened doors, but it also created enemies. Some people respected him because of his money. Others feared him because of his connections. After his father died, Orson inherited control of the family business. He quickly learned that many people around him were interested in his fortune, not his character. At dinners, people laughed at his jokes even when they were not funny. Business. Partners agreed with every decision he made. Women who barely knew him spoke about marriage before they knew anything about his life. Orson started wondering if anyone would choose him if the money disappeared. That question brought him to Bellwether County. He had heard about a woman named Elowen Hart, the daughter of a farming family that had survived difficult years without accepting help from wealthy men. People in town said she was practical, honest, and impossible to impress. Some called her stubborn. Orson wanted to know the truth. When he reached the Hart farm, he found Elowen repairing a broken wagon wheel near the barn. She wore simple clothes, her hands were covered with dirt, and she was working alone. She looked at him before he could speak. "You are looking for work?" she asked. Orson nodded. "My name is Owen. I have experience with animals and fields." Elowen looked at his hands. "You don't have the hands of a farm worker." Orson almost smiled. "I have worked before." She did not argue. She simply picked up a wooden bucket and handed it to him. "The water pump is near the back fence. Bring 2 buckets. Then we will talk." It was not the welcome he expected. Most people who met him in the city tried to make him comfortable. Elowen gave him a task. Orson carried the buckets without complaint. During the next hour, she watched how he worked. She did not ask about his family or his past. She only cared if he did what he promised. At the end of the day, she offered him a place to sleep in the small room above the barn. "The pay is not much," she said. "Food is included. If you do your part, you can stay." Orson accepted. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Living as Owen Reed was the first time in a long while that someone judged him by his actions. The first weeks were harder than he expected. Farming required patience. There were no assistants waiting to solve problems. There were no employees following orders. If a fence broke, he repaired it. If an animal became sick, he helped take care of it. If the harvest was late, everyone suffered. Elowen never treated him differently from the other workers. She corrected him when he made mistakes. She thanked him when he helped. She never tried to impress him. That was what caught his attention. One afternoon, while fixing a damaged section of the barn, Orson heard 2 workers talking. Her father refused help from several businessmen. One of them said he believed accepting money meant losing control. Orson listened quietly. He understood that feeling. His own father had always said that money was not only about comfort, it was about influence. The person who controlled the money often controlled the decisions. But Orson was starting to question if control was worth losing trust. A month passed. The farm faced a serious problem. A company from the city had bought several properties nearby and wanted to purchase the Heartland. They offered more money than the farm had ever been worth. Elowen refused. The company representative returned twice. The third time, he brought documents. "If you do not sell, you will have problems," he told her. Orson noticed the change in her expression. She was not afraid of losing wealth. She was afraid of losing the home her family had built. After the man left, Orson asked why she refused such a large amount of money. "Because they don't want the land," she answered. "They want control of everything around it." Those words stayed with him. He knew exactly what she meant. The company was connected to people who competed with his family's businesses. They were not simply buying farms. They were trying to expand their influence. For the first time, Orson realized his disguise had placed him inside a problem connected to his own world. He could solve it easily. One phone call would be enough. But if he revealed himself, everything would change. Elowen would see him differently. The workers would see him differently, and the answer he came to find would become impossible to discover. So he stayed silent. Instead, he worked harder. He helped organize the workers. He studied the farm records at night. He looked for ways to reduce costs without using his family's money. Elowen noticed. "You learn quickly," she told him one evening. Orson looked up from the papers. "I had good teachers. You never talk about where you came from." He became quiet. "My past is complicated." Elowen sat across from him. "Everyone has a past. The question is what they do with it." That sentence affected him more than he expected, because Orson knew his past was not simple. His family had built its fortune through legal businesses, but there were also rumors about old alliances and dangerous people who had helped them grow. Orson had spent years trying to separate himself from those parts of the family history. He wanted to build something different, but changing a name was easier than changing the expectations attached to it. As winter approached, the situation around the farm became worse. The company began spreading rumors that the Hart family was unable to manage their own property. Some neighbors started doubting them. A local newspaper published an article questioning Elowen's decisions. She continued working, but Orson saw the pressure increasing. One night, he found her sitting alone in the kitchen, looking at old farm documents. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't." "Why?" "Because tomorrow I have to decide whether protecting this place is worth risking everything." Orson looked at her. "What would your family want?" She touched the old papers. "My father always said land is not valuable because of what it can give you. It is valuable because of what you leave behind." For the first time, Orson understood why he felt different around her. Elowen was not impressed by power. She cared about responsibility. She cared about what remained after someone was gone. The key. Next morning, a black car arrived at the farm. Everyone stopped working. A man in an expensive suit stepped out and walked toward the house. Orson recognized him immediately. His name was Silas Crow. He was one of the most influential businessmen in the region, and he knew exactly who Orson Vale really was. Silas looked at him and smiled. "Owen Reed," he said. "Interesting name." Orson felt the situation changing. Elowen looked between them. She understood that something was wrong. Silas took a step closer. "I think we should talk about who you really are." Orson had spent months hiding the truth. Now the truth had found him. Orson remained silent when Silas Crow said his real name was not Owen Reed. The workers nearby stopped what they were doing. They looked at the stranger who had spent weeks repairing fences, carrying supplies and eating at the same table as them. Elowen did not say anything. She simply waited. That was worse for Orson than anger. He had prepared himself for accusations. He had prepared himself for disappointment, but he had not prepared himself to see the woman he respected waiting for an explanation. Silas adjusted his coat and looked around the farm. "I knew you would eventually get tired of pretending," he said. Orson kept his voice calm. "You came here for a reason." Silas smiled. "Always direct. Your father was the same." The mention of his father changed the atmosphere. Orson had avoided talking about his family since arriving. He knew his father's reputation reached places he never wanted to visit. "What do you want?" Orson asked. Silas looked toward Elowen. "Not here." "No," Orson replied. "If you have something to say, say it." Silas looked at the workers and then back at him. "Fine. You are Orson Vale, the man who inherited one of the largest businesses on the coast, the man who owns half the warehouses in East Harbor, the man who people in the city either want to work with or avoid." The workers looked surprised. Elowen remained still. Orson could feel the damage before anyone spoke. He had built a different image on that farm. Now it was gone. Silas continued. "You came here pretending to be poor because you wanted to test people." Orson looked at him. "That is not why I came, isn't it?" Silas stepped closer. "You wanted to know if someone could like you without your money. That is exactly what you did." The words were harsh because there was some truth in them. Orson had hidden his identity to find an honest answer, but he also understood that hiding the truth was still a choice. Elowen finally spoke. Is Owen Reed your real name? Orson turned toward her. No. The answer was simple. Her expression changed. Did anything you told me come from the truth? Yes. Everything? Orson hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Elowen looked away. I need some time. She walked back toward the house. Orson wanted to follow her, but he knew he had no right to demand anything. Silas watched the scene. You made a mistake. Orson looked at him. What mistake? You thought money was the only thing that changed how people saw you. Silas got into his car. The truth is more complicated. People do not like being tested. Then he left. For the rest of the day, Orson worked without saying much. The workers treated him differently, not with respect, not with anger, with uncertainty. That was something he had never experienced before. People usually had an opinion about him before meeting him. Now, they had to decide what they thought. That evening, Elowen found him near the barn. You should have told me. Orson nodded. Yes. Why didn't you? He took a moment before answering. Because every time people learned my name, they changed. Elowen crossed her arms. And you thought I deserved a test? Orson looked down. No, I was wrong. That answer surprised her. She expected excuses. She expected him to explain why his decision was justified. Instead, he admitted his mistake. I came here because I wanted to know if someone could see me without my family's name, he said. But I forgot that you were also making a choice. You had the right to know who I was. Elowen was quiet. The problem was not his wealth. The problem was trust. I don't care that you have money, she said. I care that you decided for me. Those words stayed with him, because they were true. Over the next few days, Orson did not leave. He could have returned to his mansion, his employees, and his comfortable life. Instead, he stayed at the farm, not because he wanted to prove something, because leaving would have been easier than facing the consequences. The company trying to buy the land continued its pressure, and now Orson knew exactly who was behind it. Silas Crow was not acting alone. The company belonged to a group of businessmen who wanted control of several farms in the region. They planned to create a private transportation route that would increase their profits. The Hart farm was in the middle of their plan. Orson knew the methods they used. They did not always break laws. They used contracts, rumors, and pressure. They made people feel like they had no choice. One night, Orson reviewed the documents again. He noticed something strange. A signature on one of the papers belonged to a company connected to Silas. But there was another name involved. A person from Orson's own business network. His family's former partner, Garrick Wren. Orson had known Garrick since he was young. His father trusted him. After his father died, Garrick had helped manage several parts of the business. But now Orson wondered if Garrick had been protecting his own interests. The next morning, he decided to investigate. He traveled to East Harbor wearing normal clothes instead of expensive ones. He visited an old office where some of his father's records were stored. The receptionist looked surprised to see him. Mr. Vale? Orson looked at her. Keep your voice down. She nodded. Inside the office, he searched through old documents. After several hours, he found something important. Years earlier, Garrick had secretly purchased land near Bellwether County, the same area where the company was now trying to expand. The situation became clearer. Garrick was not helping Silas. He was working with him. And if the Hart farm was sold, Garrick would make a large profit. Orson returned to the farm before sunset. Elowen was outside feeding the animals. I found something, he said. She looked at him. About the land? Yes. He explained everything. For the first time since learning the truth, she listened without distance. Not because she trusted him completely, because the problem affected her family. What will you do? She asked. Orson looked toward the fields. I can fight them. With your money? He paused. That is what I would have done before. And now? He looked at the farm workers repairing the fence. Now I want to help you protect it without taking control. That was the difference. Before, Orson believed solving a problem meant using power. Now he understood that helping someone also meant respecting their decisions. Elowen did not forgive him immediately, but she saw the change. The following weeks were difficult. Orson used his knowledge of business to help organize legal documents. He helped the family find independent investors who respected the farm's ownership. But he never signed anything without Elowen's approval. He never made decisions. alone. Slowly, the workers began trusting him again. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Garrick Wren. The message was short. He wanted to meet. Orson knew it was not a friendly visit. Garrick was not the type of person who apologized. When they met in a small restaurant near the harbor, Garrick looked older than Orson remembered. "You are making mistakes," Garrick said. Orson looked at him. "Protecting people is a mistake? You are thinking emotionally." "No, I am thinking differently." Garrick leaned back. "Your father understood how the world worked." Orson looked at him. "My father understood power. I am trying to understand responsibility." Garrick smiled slightly. "You sound like a man who still believes he can change things." "Maybe I am." The conversation ended without agreement. But before leaving, Garrick said something that bothered Orson. "You think Elowen likes the man you are now, but you still haven't shown her everything." Orson knew what he meant. There were parts of his family history he had not shared, things connected to old decisions, things that could change how Elowen saw him. When he returned to the farm, he found Elowen waiting near the house. She had a document in her hand, a newspaper. The headline was about Orson Vale, not about Owen Reed, not about the farm worker, about the wealthy heir. The article accused his family of illegal deals from years earlier. Elowen looked at him. "Is there something else I should know?" Orson knew that this time, silence would cause more damage. He had spent his life protecting his family name. Now he had to decide if protecting the truth mattered more. Orson looked at the newspaper in Elowen's hands and understood that the hardest conversation had not happened yet. The problem was no longer the farm. The problem was the history attached to his name. He sat down on the wooden bench outside the house. For several seconds he did not speak. Elowen waited. She was not asking for perfection. She was asking for honesty. "My family built its business over many years," Orson said. "Some decisions were good, others were not." Elowen looked at him. "What decisions?" Orson knew he could avoid the answer. That was what people in his position usually did. They hired lawyers. They controlled information. They waited until problems disappeared. But he was tired of hiding behind the same methods. "My father worked with people who cared more about influence than rules," he said. "He believed that having powerful allies was necessary to survive. And you?" "I spent years trying to separate myself from that." Elowen folded the newspaper. "But did you benefit from it?" The question was simple. The answer was not. "Yes." The honesty made the conversation heavier. Orson continued. "I inherited what my father built. I cannot pretend I had nothing to do with the advantages I received." Elowen looked toward the fields. Many people would have expected her to judge him immediately. Instead, she thought about it. "You know what bothers me?" Orson waited. "Not that you were born into money, not that your family has influence. What bothers me is that you thought hiding was easier than trusting me." He lowered his head. "I know." That was the first time he truly accepted that his mistake was not only about the disguise, it was about control. For years, Orson had controlled what people knew about him, because he believed information was protection. But on the farm, he was learning that trust required the opposite. It required giving someone the chance to choose. The next morning, the situation became worse. A group of men arrived at the farm with legal papers. They claimed the company had found irregularities in the property records. Elowen read the documents carefully. "They are trying to delay us," she said. Orson recognized the strategy. They were not trying to win quickly. They wanted to create enough problems that the family would become exhausted and eventually accept the offer. Bills, court meetings, pressure. That was how powerful people often forced decisions without directly taking anything. One of the men looked at Orson. "You should stay out of this." Orson stepped forward. "Why?" The man smiled. "Because this is not your fight." Orson looked at Elowen, then at the farm. "It is now." The man noticed the confidence in his voice. "You have no idea who you are challenging." Orson answered calmly. "I know exactly who I am challenging." The men left. But everyone understood that the conflict had changed. The company now knew Orson was involved. His identity could no longer be used as a secret. That afternoon, Orson received a message from his business office. Several partners wanted to meet. Some were worried about his actions. Others wanted him to stop helping the Hart family. When he arrived in East Harbor, the atmosphere was different. People who once greeted him with respect now looked uncomfortable. One partner, Aldrich Stone, placed documents on the table. "You are risking the company." Orson looked at the papers. "Because I am defending a farm? Because you are mixing personal feelings with business." Orson looked around the room. For years, he had heard the same argument. Everything was about profit. Everything was about reputation. Everything was about winning. But nobody asked what kind of person remained after the victory. "I am not using company money," Orson said. "That is not the point." "Then what is?" Nobody answered. Because the real problem was not financial. The real problem was that Orson was changing the way he operated, and some people benefited from the old version of him. After the meeting, Aldrich followed him outside. "You are becoming like your father?" Orson stopped. "That is supposed to scare me?" "It should." Orson looked at him. "My father had power, but he also left behind problems that other people had to solve." He walked away. Returning to the farm felt different. For the first time, he was not running from his family's past. He was facing it. Days passed. The legal battle continued. Elowen and Orson worked together, not as owner and employee, not as a wealthy man and a farmer, as two people trying to protect something important. One evening, while checking the fields, Elowen asked him a question. "Why did you really choose this farm?" Orson smiled slightly. "I told you." "No. You told me the reason you wanted to come." She looked at him. "I am asking why this place." Orson thought about it. The answer surprised him. "Because nobody here cared who I was." Elowen waited. "In my world, people always knew my name before they knew me. Here, I was just someone who needed to work. That was important to you?" "Yes." She nodded. "I understand that." For a moment, there was silence. The relationship between them had changed. The trust was not completely repaired, but something new was growing. Not based on an illusion, based on the truth. However, the conflict was far from over. A week later, a serious problem appeared. A shipment of farm equipment that the Harts had ordered was canceled without explanation. The supplier claimed there was a financial issue. Orson investigated. He quickly discovered the reason. Someone had pressured the supplier to cut ties with the farm. It was another attempt to weaken them. This time, Orson was angry. Not because of the attack against him, because the company was hurting people who had nothing to do with their business fight. He decided to act, but before making any move, he went to Elowen. "I can stop them," he said. She looked at him. "How?" "With my influence." She was quiet. Old Orson would have already made the decision. New Orson was asking. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "On whether you are protecting us or controlling the situation." The question forced him to think. He had spent his whole life believing those two things were the same. Now he knew they were different. "I want to protect this place," he said, "but I will do it your way." Elowen nodded. "Then we need evidence." Together they started collecting records. They spoke with suppliers. They reviewed contracts. They documented every attempt to pressure the farm. For several days, they worked without rest. The turning point came when an old employee from one of the companies contacted them. His name was Corbin Hale. He had worked with Garrick Wren for years. He brought documents that showed private agreements between Garrick and the company trying to buy the land. "There is more," Corbin said. Orson looked at the papers. "What?" Corbin hesitated. "These agreements started before your father died." The room became silent. Orson read the documents again. The dates changed everything. If they were real, it meant someone inside his own family had been planning this for years, possibly even before Orson inherited the business. He looked at Elowen. For the first time, the fight was no longer only about saving the farm. It was about discovering what had really happened inside his own family. That night, Orson opened an old box that belonged to his father. Inside were letters, contracts, and personal notes, documents he had never seen before. At the bottom of the box was a letter with his name written on it. The letter was dated 3 months before his father died. Orson opened it. The first line changed everything. "My son, if you are reading this, then you have discovered the truth I tried to hide from you." Orson continued reading, and he realized his father had known about the plan against the Hart family long before he arrived at the farm. Orson read the letter 3 times before accepting what it meant. His father had known about the land. He had known about Garrick Wren. and he had known that powerful men were preparing to take control of farms around Bellwether County. But the most difficult part was not what his father knew. It was what he had done about it. The letter explained that years earlier, Orson's father, Owen Vale, had discovered that Garrick was secretly buying land through different companies. At first, Owen believed it was only a business strategy. That changed when he discovered that Garrick was using pressure tactics against families who refused to sell. Owen wrote that he confronted Garrick, but he never made the information public. He kept the matter inside the company. Orson stopped reading for a moment. That decision bothered him. Not because his father had made a mistake, because it was the same mistake Orson had almost repeated, keeping information hidden, trying to solve problems alone, believing control was safer than honesty. The letter continued. Owen admitted that he had spent years protecting the family name. He feared that exposing Garrick would damage the company he built and destroy the reputation of everyone connected to it. But before his death, he realized that protecting a name while ignoring the truth was not a legacy. It was only silence. At the bottom of the letter, his father wrote, "A person's wealth is measured by what they keep. A person's legacy is measured by what they protect." Orson closed the letter. For years he had searched for someone who would see him beyond his money. Now he understood that he also needed to see beyond his family's name. He needed to decide what kind of man he wanted to become. The next morning, he showed the letter to Elowen. She read it carefully. When she finished, she looked at him. "You have a choice now." Orson nodded. "I know. You can use this information to destroy them. And I could. But," he looked toward the fields, "but that would only continue the same cycle." Elowen understood. The people who had caused problems believed power gave them the right to decide everything. Orson could not fight that by becoming the same kind of person. They needed evidence. They needed legal action. They needed the truth, not revenge. Over the next few weeks, they prepared their case. Corbin Hale helped organize the documents he had collected over the years. Several other workers from different companies agreed to provide information. Many were afraid. They had families, jobs, responsibilities. Orson understood their fear. In his world, people often stayed silent because they believed speaking would cost them everything. He wanted to prove that silence also had a cost. The first public hearing took place in Bellwether County. The room was small. There were no reporters from major newspapers, no crowd, just families, lawyers, and local officials. Garrick Wren arrived confident. He believed the situation would disappear like many problems before. When he saw Orson sitting with the Hart family, his expression changed. "You are making a mistake," Garrick said quietly before entering the room. Orson looked at him. "I made enough mistakes by staying quiet." Garrick shook his head. "You think these people will remember your actions?" Orson answered, "I do not need them to remember my name." That was the difference. Years ago, Orson wanted people to recognize him. Now he wanted the right thing to happen, even if nobody knew who made it possible. The hearing lasted several hours. Documents were presented. Witnesses spoke. The agreements between Garrick and the company were examined. The pressure tactics became clear. The attempt to force the Hart family to sell was no longer a rumor. It was documented. But the biggest surprise came when a former accountant from one of Garrick's companies appeared. Her name was Morel Doss. She brought financial records showing that several land purchases had been hidden through false companies. The information changed the entire case. Garrick had not only pressured families, he had also hidden money movements. The hearing was postponed for further investigation. For the first time, Garrick looked uncertain, but the victory was not immediate. The farm still had problems. The legal process would take months. Bills still needed to be paid. The field still needed work. Life continued. That was something Orson learned during his time at the farm. Winning a fight did not mean every problem disappeared. Sometimes it only meant you earned the chance to continue. During that period, his relationship with Elowen slowly changed. There was no sudden moment where everything became perfect. There were conversations, small acts, trust rebuilt over time. One evening they sat outside, the house watching the workers finish repairing the old fence. "You know," Elowen said, "when you arrived here I thought you were just another person looking for an easy solution." Orson smiled. "I was." She looked at him. "At least you admit it. I spent most of my life thinking money could fix anything. And now, Now I think money is only useful when it helps people make their own decisions. Elowen nodded. That is a better answer. Months passed. The investigation continued. Garrick lost several business partnerships. The company trying to buy the land withdrew from Bellwether County. The Hart farm survived. But the biggest change happened inside Orson. When he returned to East Harbor, he did not return as the same man. He changed the way his company operated. He ended relationships with partners involved in questionable practices. He created new rules for transparency. Some people criticized him. They said he was weakening the business. Others respected him. But Orson no longer measured his decisions by public approval. He measured them by whether he could accept them when looking back years later. 1 year after he first arrived at the farm, he returned to Bellwether County. The fields were healthier. The barn had been repaired. The farm was still simple, but it was stronger. Elowen found him near the same fence he had repaired when he first arrived. You came back. I said I would. She looked at him. Do you miss your old life? Orson thought about it. I miss some parts. Which parts? The certainty. Elowen smiled slightly. And now? Now I know certainty can be comfortable, but it does not always make you better. They stood there quietly. The man who arrived pretending to have nothing had learned that the most important things could not be bought. Respect, trust, a clear conscience. But there was still one thing left. Orson had to decide if he would continue living between two worlds. The world of wealth and influence, and the world where people judged him by his actions. The answer came from an unexpected place. A few days later, he received another letter. This time it was not from his father. It was from someone who had worked with him at the farm. A simple note. It thanked him for treating workers like people instead of numbers. That letter meant more to him than any business award he had received, because it showed him that his greatest achievement was not protecting a fortune. It was changing how he used it. 2 years. After Orson Vale first arrived at the Hart farm pretending to be a simple worker, many people in East Harbor still talked about what happened. Some called him foolish. Others called him different. The newspapers had created their own versions of the story. Some said a wealthy heir had abandoned his old ways. Others said he had only done it to protect his reputation. Orson stopped reading those opinions. He had learned that people often judged what they could see, but they rarely knew the decisions behind it. His focus was on what remained. The Hart farm was no longer fighting for survival. It had become an example for other small farms in the region, not because it became rich, but because it stayed independent. Elowen created a system where local farmers could share equipment and negotiate better prices together. Orson helped with the organization, but he refused to put his name on it. When people asked why, he gave the same answer. It belongs to the people who built it. The "tu" was something the old Orson would never have said. Before Bellwether County, he believed leadership meant being the person with the final decision. Now he understood that good leadership often meant creating space for others to decide. However, his new approach created problems inside his own company. Several executives were unhappy with his changes. They believed Orson was becoming too soft. One of them was Aldrich Stone. He had worked with the Vale family for almost 20 years. You are forgetting what built this company, Aldrich said during a meeting. Orson looked at the reports in front of him. No, I am remembering. Aldrich frowned. Your father was successful because he understood competition. My father was successful because he worked hard. But some decisions created problems that we are still dealing with. Aldrich leaned forward. You cannot run a major company based on feelings. Orson closed the folder. And you cannot build something lasting if people stop trusting you. The room became quiet. Many executives had expected Orson to argue about money. Instead, he was talking about reputation and responsibility. After the meeting, Aldrich stayed behind. You are risking everything. Orson looked at him. Maybe. That answer surprised him. A powerful person admitting uncertainty was rare. But I would rather risk changing something than protect something that is already wrong. Aldrich left without responding. The disagreement was not finished. Orson knew that. People who benefited from the old system rarely accepted change easily. Meanwhile, his relationship with Elowen continued to grow, but they still faced challenges. Their lives were completely different. Orson had business obligations. Elowen had responsibilities on the farm. There were days when they barely had time to speak. One evening, they argued. It was not a dramatic fight. It was a normal disagreement. "You keep trying to solve every problem for everyone," Elowen said. Orson looked, confused. "I am trying to help." "I know." "Then what is the problem?" "The problem is that helping is not the same as carrying everything alone." Her words reminded him of his father, a man who tried to protect everything until he ended up hiding too much. Orson sat quietly. He realized that even after everything he had learned, some habits were difficult to change. "I do not want to become someone who controls everything again," he said. "Then stop acting like you have to." That conversation stayed with him. Growth was not a single decision. It was something a person had to practice every day. Several months later, a new problem appeared. A group of investors wanted to buy part of Orson's company. The offer was extremely profitable. Many people encouraged him to accept. It would increase his personal wealth. It would make the company stronger financially. But during the review process, Orson discovered that the investors had plans to close several smaller operations and replace local workers with cheaper alternatives. The decision became complicated. Accepting the offer would benefit the company. Rejecting it would protect thousands of workers. The board wanted a quick answer. "You are thinking too personally," one executive said. Orson looked at the numbers. "No, I am thinking about the people behind them." The executive shook his head. "That is not how business works." Orson remembered hearing those words many times, but he no longer accepted them as truth. Business was made by people. Without them, numbers meant nothing. He rejected the offer. The decision caused financial pressure. The company's value dropped temporarily. Some newspapers criticized him. Some investors left. For several weeks, Orson questioned himself, not because he regretted protecting people, because every decision had consequences. That was another lesson the farm had taught him. Doing the right thing did not always make life easier. Sometimes, it made things harder. One afternoon, he returned to Bellwether County. He found Elowen working near the fields. She noticed his expression. Something happened. Orson nodded. "I made a decision that may cost me a lot." She looked at him. "Do you regret it?" "No." "Then why do you look worried?" "Because I know good intentions do not guarantee good results." Elowen smiled slightly. "That is the most honest thing you have said." He laughed. "Is that a compliment?" "Yes." They walked through the farm. Orson looked at the land where he had once arrived pretending to have nothing. He remembered how different he was. Back then he wanted to know if someone would choose him without money. Now he understood a better question. Could he choose the right thing even when nobody rewarded him? That was the real test. Later that year the company recovered. Not because Orson returned to old methods. Because new partners appeared who believed in his direction. The business became smaller in some areas, but stronger in others. It gained trust. And trust became something money could not easily replace. One morning, Orson received an unexpected visit. A young man arrived at his office. His name was Everett Cole. He was the son of one of the workers who had helped repair the Hart farm years earlier. "I wanted to thank you," Everett said. Orson looked surprised. "For what?" "My father said you treated him with respect when nobody knew who you were." Orson smiled. "That was a long time ago." Everett shook his head. "No, that is exactly why it mattered." The young man left. Orson stayed silent for a while. He realized something important. The moments that define a person are often the ones nobody records. Not the public victories, not the awards, not the money. The small choices. The way someone treats another person when there is nothing to gain. That evening, Orson wrote a letter, not to his employees, not to his investors, to himself. He wrote about the man he was before Bellwether County, a man who had everything, except peace, and the man he became after losing the one thing he thought protected him, his image. Because when people stopped seeing the name Vale, he finally had the chance to discover Orson. 5 years after Orson Vale first arrived at the Hart farm, the story of the wealthy heir who once worked as a farmhand had become less interesting to the public. The newspapers moved on. New scandals appeared. New businessmen became the center of attention. For Orson, that was a relief. He had learned that living for public approval was another kind of prison. What mattered to him now was the work that continued after people stopped watching. The Hart farm had changed. but it had not lost its identity. The old barn remained. The same fields were still planted every season. The same workers still gathered for meals after long days. The difference was that the farm was no longer fighting alone. Several nearby families had joined the cooperative system Elowen created. They shared equipment. They negotiated together. They helped each other during difficult seasons. It was not a perfect system. There were disagreements, there were losses, but decisions were made by the people affected by them. That was what made it different. Orson visited often, sometimes for business reasons, sometimes because the farm had become the place where he felt most honest. One afternoon, he found Elowen reviewing financial records inside the old farmhouse. "You still work too much," he said. She looked up. "And you still think you're allowed to tell me that?" He smiled. Fair point. Their relationship had changed over time. They no longer tried to prove anything to each other. They had learned each other's flaws. They knew when to speak. They knew when to listen. But life still brought difficult choices. That year, the region faced a serious drought. Many farmers lost part of their harvest. The Hart cooperative survived, but not without damage. Some members wanted to sell their land. They were tired. They had debts. They believed the easiest option was to accept offers from large companies. A meeting was organized. The discussion became tense. Some farmers argued that survival was more important than independence. Others believed selling would destroy everything they had built. Orson listened. Years earlier, he would have entered the room and tried to solve the problem immediately. Now he waited. He allowed people to speak. After everyone finished, Elowen asked him for his opinion. Orson looked around the room. "I think we need to stop asking what protects us today and ask what decision we can live with tomorrow." Nobody answered immediately. He continued. "I know what it feels like to inherit something powerful. I also know what it feels like to lose control of your own decisions. The question is not only how much money we receive, the question is what we are giving up." The farmers discussed the matter for several hours. In the end, some chose to sell. Others stayed. Orson respected both choices. That was another lesson he had learned. Protecting people did not mean making choices for them. It meant giving them the information and freedom to choose. Months later, another challenge arrived. This time, it came from inside his own company. Aldrich Stone resigned from his position and publicly criticized Orson's leadership. He claimed Orson had weakened the Vale business by refusing aggressive expansion. The statement created uncertainty. Investors questioned the Wildwood company. Employees worried about their future. For a few days, Orson considered whether he had made the wrong choices. He looked at old documents, old financial reports, old strategies. He compared them with the present. The company was not the largest anymore. It was not the most aggressive, but it had fewer internal problems. Employees stayed longer. Partners trusted agreements. The company's reputation had improved. The numbers were different. The foundation was stronger. That was something his father had failed to understand. A business was not only built through growth, it was built through trust. During that period, Orson received a letter from someone unexpected. Garrick Wren. The man who had once tried to take control of the Heartland was now living quietly outside the city. His business career had ended after the investigation. The letter was short. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not make excuses. He simply wrote that he had spent years believing power was the only thing people respected. But after losing everything, he realized that fear and respect were never the same. Orson read the letter several times. He did not forgive Garrick immediately. Some actions had consequences. Some damage could not simply disappear. But he understood something. People were capable of becoming different, even after making serious mistakes. The question was whether they accepted responsibility. That evening, Orson showed the letter to Elowen. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think regret is easy. And change? Change is harder." She nodded. That was the difference between words and actions. A year later, Orson and Elowen married quietly at the Hart farm. There was no large event, no newspaper announcement, no business guests, only family, workers, and close friends. The same place where Orson had arrived pretending to be someone else became the place where he promised to live honestly. During the celebration, one of the older workers approached him. His name was Tobias Merrow. He had been there on the first day Orson arrived. "I remember when you came here," Tobias said. Orson smiled. "I was terrible at farming. Tobias laughed. That too. They both looked toward the fields. You know what surprised me? What? That you stayed after people discovered who you were. Orson looked at him. Why? Because most people with your position would have left when things became uncomfortable. That sentence stayed with him. Because Tobias was right. The easiest moment to show character was not when everything was going well. It was when leaving would have been easier. Years passed. Orson and Elowen built a family. They continued working. They continued making mistakes. They continued learning. Their life was not perfect. There were disagreements. There were difficult years. There were moments when money could not solve the problems they faced. But they had something they did not have before. A relationship built without pretending. One evening, many years after his first arrival at the farm, Orson walked alone through the fields. The old fence he repaired on his first day was still there. It had been repaired many times. Some pieces had been replaced, but it remained. He touched the wood and thought about everything that happened. The disguise, the secret, the confrontation, the choices, the people who changed his life. He realized the farm had taught him something no business school could teach. A person's value was not proven by what they owned. It was shown by what they were willing to protect. And sometimes the person who believes they are testing others is actually the person being tested. Years continued to pass, and Orson Vale became less known as the wealthy heir who changed his ways and more known as a businessman who built differently. He never liked being called an example. He believed that people often turned simple decisions into stories bigger than reality. The truth was that he made mistakes, many of them. He had hidden his identity. He had tried to control situations. He had believed that money could solve problems that required patience. The difference was that he stopped defending those mistakes and started learning from them. That was what separated his past from his present. At the Hart farm, life continued with the same rhythm. The mornings started early. The workers checked the fields. The animals needed care. The equipment needed repairs. There were no perfect seasons. Some years brought good harvests. Others brought losses. But the farm remained. And for Orson, that was more meaningful than any number written in a financial report. One autumn morning, he received news that surprised him. The local community center wanted to create a program for young farmers and business owners. They wanted Orson to be one of the people supporting it. At first, he refused. I am not the right person for that, he told Elowen. She looked at him. Why? Because people will think I have all the answers. And do you? No. Then tell them that. Her response made him laugh. Over time, Orson accepted. The first meeting was small. Only a few young people attended. Some wanted to start businesses. Others wanted to continue family farms. They asked him questions about money, success, and leadership. Many expected complicated answers. They expected strategies, numbers, secrets. Instead, Orson told them about mistakes. He explained that having resources did not remove uncertainty. It only changed the type of problems a person faced. A person can have enough money to buy comfort, he said, but not enough money to buy trust. The young people listened, because the lesson was not about becoming rich. It was about understanding responsibility. After the meeting, a young woman approached him. Her name was Nessa Whitmore. My father worked with your company years ago, she said. Orson smiled. Was that good or bad? She laughed. He said you were different from other executives. Orson looked curious. What did he mean? He said you were the first person in that position who asked workers what they needed before making decisions. That simple comment stayed with him, because he remembered a time when he never asked. He only decided. The following year brought another difficult moment. A major company offered to buy the Vale business completely. The amount was larger than any previous offer. Many people believed Orson would accept. It would secure his family's fortune for generations. His advisors prepared the documents. The numbers were impressive, but when he reviewed the conditions, he found something that bothered him. The buyers wanted to reduce the number of employees and close smaller branches. They argued it was necessary for efficiency. Orson understood the logic. From a financial perspective, it made sense, but he also knew that behind every position was a person, someone with a family, someone who had trusted the company. He asked for more time. The board became impatient. You are allowing emotions to influence business again, one member said. Orson looked at the room. No, I am considering the full cost of the decision. The member shook his head. The world does not work that way. Orson remembered hearing the same phrase many times. But experience had changed him. The world did work that way. People simply ignored it when numbers looked better. After several discussions, Orson rejected the offer. Some people criticized him. Others respected him. But once again he chose the decision he could accept years later. That night he returned home late. Elowen was reading near the fireplace. You look tired, she said. I am. Do you regret it? Orson thought for a moment. No. Then why are you worried? Because every important decision costs something. Elowen closed the book. That is something you finally understand. Orson smiled. Years earlier, he believed winning meant avoiding loss. Now he knew every choice involved. Giving something up. The question was what was worth losing. Over time, the Vale company became smaller but more stable. It focused on long-term partnerships instead of quick profits. It invested in local communities. It supported workers who wanted to improve their skills. Some competitors grew faster. Some became larger. But Orson stopped comparing. He had learned that a person could spend their entire life chasing someone else's definition of success and still feel empty. One winter evening, Orson and Elowen returned to the place where everything started, the old barn, the same building where he had slept during his first months as Owen Reed. The structure had been restored, but parts of the original wood remained. You ever think about that first day? Elowen asked. Almost every day. Do you still think it was a mistake? Orson looked around. Yes. She raised an eyebrow. Yes? It was a mistake to hide the truth. Elowen smiled. But it was also the decision that forced me to learn something I would never have learned otherwise. They stood quietly. The farm had changed both of them. For Elowen, it brought someone who challenged her beliefs about wealth. For Orson, it brought someone who showed him that a person's value was not connected to their possessions. Years later, their story was not remembered because a rich man disguised himself as a worker. That was only the beginning. The real story was about a man who discovered that understanding others required humility, and that a legacy was not built by being remembered. It was built by leaving something useful behind. One spring morning, Orson visited the fields with his grandchildren. He walked slowly now. Age had changed him. His hair was gray. His steps were calmer. One of the children asked him, "Grandfather, were you really a farm worker?" Orson smiled. Yes. The child looked surprised. But you were rich. Orson looked toward the fields. I had money before I learned how to work. The child waited. What did you learn? Orson thought about the answer. I learned that a person can own many things and still not understand what matters. The child looked confused. So Orson explained. The way you treat people when they cannot give you anything in return says more about you than anything you own. That was the lesson he wanted to leave behind. Not the business. Not the money, not the name, the lesson, because names disappear, companies change, fortunes rise and fall, but the way someone treats another person can continue long after they are gone, and that was the legacy Orson Vale wanted to leave. Many years later, the Hart farm looked almost the same from the outside. The wooden fences still surrounded the fields. The old farmhouse still stood on the same hill. The mornings were still filled with the sounds of animals, tools, and people beginning another day of work. But inside that simple place, generations of decisions had created something bigger than a farm. They had created a way of thinking. Orson Vale spent his final years away from the attention he once avoided. He no longer cared about proving anything. The world had already decided what it wanted to believe about him. Some remembered the wealthy man who arrived pretending to be poor. Others remembered the businessman who changed the way his company operated. But the people who knew him best remembered something simpler. They remembered how he listened. They remembered how he treated workers. They remembered that he apologized when he was wrong. For Orson, those were the things that mattered. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, he watched young workers repairing a section of the fence, the same type of work he had done when he first arrived. The difference was that now he was watching others learn. Elowen sat beside him. Time had changed both of them. They had experienced good years and difficult ones. They had lost people they loved. They had faced problems that money could not remove, but they had stayed together through all of it. You are thinking too much again, Elowen said. Orson smiled. I am remembering. About what? About the first day I came here. She looked toward the field. You were terrible at pretending to be a farm worker. He laughed. I was not prepared. You thought working with your hands for a few days would teach you everything. I was arrogant. Yes. He looked at her. You agree quickly. Because it is true. They both laughed. That was something they had learned over the years. A strong relationship was not built by avoiding uncomfortable truths. It was built by being able to face them. Orson looked at the old fence. When I came here, I thought I was searching for someone who would accept me without money. Elowen listened. But I was asking the wrong question. What was the right one? He looked at her. Who would I become if nobody cared about my name? She smiled. That was the answer you found here. Yes. The conversation ended there. It did not need a dramatic conclusion. Some truths become clear through years of living them. A few months later, Orson's health began to decline. He continued working, but slower. He spent more time writing. Not business plans, not financial strategies, personal notes, letters for his family, letters for the people who had been part of his life. In one of those letters, he wrote about the day he arrived at the Hart farm. He explained that he thought he was testing other people. But in reality, life was testing him. It showed him that wealth could open doors, but it could not force someone to trust you. It showed him that influence could create opportunities, but it could not create respect. And it showed him that a person's true character appeared when nobody was watching. When Orson passed away, there were no large public ceremonies. His family respected his wishes. The people closest to him gathered at the Hart farm. Workers, friends, neighbors, people who had known him before and after the money. During the gathering, one of the older workers, Tobias Marrow, spoke. He was much older now. His voice was slower, but his words were clear. I met Orson when he came here with old clothes and a false name. People smiled. He thought we were the ones being tested. The room became quiet. But every day after that, he showed us who he really was. Tobias looked around. Not because of what he owned, because of what he did. That was how the people of Bellwether County remembered him. Not as a rich man, not as a powerful businessman, as a person who learned. Years later, visitors continued coming to the Hart farm, not because it was famous, because they wanted to understand the story. The farm created a small program where young people could learn about agriculture, business, and responsibility. At the entrance, there was a simple wooden sign. It did not mention Orson's wealth. It did not mention his companies. It had one sentence. Character is shown by what we do when we have nothing to gain. That sentence became the most important part of his legacy, because the story was never really about a man who disguised himself as a poor worker. It was about a man who discovered that having everything does not mean understanding everything. Orson spent years searching for proof that someone could see beyond his wealth. In the end, he discovered something more important. He needed to learn how to see beyond his own privilege. The farm gave him that lesson. Elowen gave him that lesson. The people who challenged him gave him that lesson. And the mistakes he made gave him the chance to become someone different. The world often measures success by what a person collects. Money, property, recognition, power. But those things are temporary. A person's true legacy is found in the lives they improve, in the trust they build, in the example they leave behind. Orson Vale arrived at the Hart farm looking for an answer. He wanted to know if someone would choose him without knowing his name. But years later he understood that the greater question was not who would choose him. The greater question was who he would choose to become. And that answer stayed with him until the end. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. The life of Orson Vale reminds us that money can change our circumstances, but it cannot define our character. What truly remains is the way we treat people, the decisions we make when nobody is watching, and the impact we leave behind. If this story made you think about your own choices, subscribe to Wildwood Hearts, leave a like, share this story with someone who might enjoy it, and tell us in the comments what lesson you take from Orson's journey. Thank you for watching, and remember, a real legacy is not built by what we keep, but by what we leave in others.